That's,
there weren't competing consciousnesses at the scene.
There
that
weren't
would
any.
have expected
Yeah,
to see the
I
cars hit.
I don't think the people in the van realized that I was going right behind them. So
Right.
nobody in there was probably saying.
So you see reality.
But your analogy
You know, we're
of
gonna
film
hit.
crews expecting to see a collision would override what she said, no, and
Not
it would have
only-
been a crash.
Not only override it, but they'd have the data. They'd make the measurement with that film.
They'd all have their consciousness all together.
They would have, their consciousness would say, that's not going to happen, it's going to crash, so that's one. So now that's going to change the probability. And they're taking data. You can't leave data lying around that violates the rule set. That doesn't happen. Okay, so the situation was just right that allowed that to happen. The same thing happens in virtual reality games. You know, my son, when he first started playing World of Warcraft, he didn't know how to work his player. He had some lizard guy. And his lizard guy fell in a canal. And he stayed in the canal, and then he drowned. He was dead. Well, why'd he drown? No oxygen. He was underwater. Well, you know, World of Warcraft doesn't render oxygen, but they render the effects of oxygen. It's the same way. They didn't have to render some kind of physical, you know, combining of atoms and molecules passing each other. It doesn't have to render any of that stuff. It just renders a result, as long as it abides by those rules.
Coming back to the situation, if there had been a film, this is just a thought experiment here, if there had been a film crew there filming this, and they looked away at the time this was taking place, so their consciousness of, oh no, there's going to be a crash, wasn't part of the equation, then on their camera they would have seen these two vehicles passing through each other, because their consciousness wouldn't have altered her desire for there not to be a crash?
No, just because they had their cameras there and were taking data, the crash would have happened.
Why?
Because they're making the measurement, they're taking the data, and one of the things is you can't violate the rule set. Two cars passing through each other violates the rule set.
Who says that? Who makes that rule?
That's just the way the reality has to work, because if we don't have that, you see, if we don't have that rule, then this is no longer a good learning lab. This is no longer a place where we can grow up. This is a fun house. Things jump around, you can't depend on anything, things teleport all over the place, you know, nothing is as it seems. Well, how do you learn? Now you're in chaos. Remember we said we needed constraints. Constraints just all went away. So in order for this reality to be a good learning lab, you have to have these constraints. The constraints of the rule set, and you can't do things to violate the rule set, otherwise it undermines the integrity of the purpose of the reality being here in the first place. So that's who says, you know, it's the rule set.
But occasionally the rule set falls apart, like in her experience.
The rule set didn't fall apart at all.
How?
What about the water?
The rule set didn't fall apart. The rule set, we just ignored it.
What about the guy changing
And
the
it
pH
didn't leave
of
any
water?
marks, so it was okay. Pardon?
The guy changing the pH of water, doesn't that violate the rule set?
No. The reason that doesn't violate the rule set, it's done in a series of steps. He can change that pH, just like they could alter the average stay in a hospital, okay? Because it all occurs within the possible uncertainty. You see, these things have to go within the possible uncertainty. So let's say those hospital patients, let's say they had enough of them that the expected value was like, you know, plus or minus a half a day or something, stay in a hospital. And that was what they expected to be that close. Well, to be statistically significant, it would have to be something that was greater than what was expected. You know, the change had to be greater than that. Instead of half a day, it would have to, you know, change it by maybe a whole day or something. Now you say, oh, this is doing something that's not expected. It's outside of the expected thing. But they couldn't change it and say, okay, everybody get out of hospital in an hour. We prayed for them, they all got out of hospital. But the average is 2 weeks. But all our people got out in an hour. See, now that violates the rule set. It's too much. You can only make the change within the natural uncertainty of the problem. Okay, well, in this case, you can, like with the robot, and like with the same with the pH. pH at any given time of water is a dynamic thing. The pH of a glass of neutral water isn't 7. You got little OH minuses and H pluses combining and pulling apart all the time. So the pH is going up and down and all around, and what they do within that uncertainty, you bias it just a hair within that randomness, and then you bias it just another hair, then you bias it just another hair, and you walk that pH up just like that robot. You change those random number generators so the bias on the random number is just a hair. Just a hair, just hair, just hair, and hair, and the thing walks off, falls off the table.
pH is logarithmic, it's powers of 10 to get it to go up even or down.
Right,
You're
right, it's
talking
huge.
a huge amount of
Yeah.
either buffer or acid
Right.
to change it 1
And
degree.
the guy can't do it
And you're
quick.
talking little bits, which I can understand.
Yeah, little bits at a time.
Hydrogen and hydrogen.
Right.
But you're talking units, which are powers of
Right, so
10.
you have to do it slowly, and the robot takes time to walk off the table, and this guy may take weeks to move that
it
pH
takes a
that
lot of
far.
time to do that?
Yeah, it takes time. He doesn't just say pH, go up a unit,
24/7
bingo.
with no sleep, he's
No,
concentrating.
no, no, he doesn't
focusing
have
his
to.
attention.
Once he
Somebody
gets a
else does?
pH at a certain level, they measure it. Okay, then he works on it. He works on it for a while. They measure it again. He works on it for a while. Once he's got it at that level, once you make the measurement
Oh,
and
it's
it's in this
thinking maths.
reality, it stays here in this reality. Once they stick a little thing in there and says the average pH of this water is 7.3, then it's 7.3, and you don't do anything else to that water, it's 7.3, and it's going to stay 7.3. You can come back next year and it'll be 7.3 if you haven't done anything to change it, if that's its average pH. You see? So it's stable. Now he moves it up another hair. Well, now it's 7.31. You make a measurement. Now it's 7.32. So he walks it up slowly, just like the robot. The robot just doesn't leap off, the edge of the table. You can't do that. The people in the hospital couldn't just suddenly, have something that was outrageous, because that violates the rule set. The rule set says that's impossible. We can't do that.
But are there cases when that does happen?
Well, the cases where that does happen is this case like this lady said, but that didn't happen to violate any rule sets because there wasn't anybody taking data, there was nobody there, but she had the intent. You see, all the situations were right. It didn't violate either the rule set or the fact that reality just changed itself. So what was there, what would have been an objective collision, just didn't happen, and you skip that frame and you start over with the two cars going away from on the other side. And it's not really that some kind of magic interaction that the molecules interleave with each other. It just didn't.
Could that
didn't
statement
happen.
be said in a mathematical proof?
Mathematics is logic. Okay? Mathematics is just a system of logic. It's the logic of quantity. Mathematics models the logic of our physical reality. Mathematics can't touch things that are outside of this physical reality.
Okay, 'cause
It's
you
limited
can't
to the
quantify.
It's limited to the
Tangible.
logic of this physical. So it's limited to the logic of the rule set.
Okay.
That's basically what mathematics can do. That's why Einstein, after 25 years of trying to come up with this TOE, theory of everything, failed. He was looking for an objective, mathematically described TOE. Can't do that. It's consciousness. It's not an objective system. It doesn't compute. We've had any number of scientists come to the conclusion that consciousness is the fundamental creator of reality, and after that, they don't know what to do.
Are some
They're
people
dead in the water. Well, what do you do after that?
are some people more conscious than others naturally?
Well, let's say some people are more aware than others.
Right.
Naturally.
So, like in a situation with her.
Yes,
maybe she had
absolutely,
more
because she
ability
had a strong
just
intent.
naturally to
Right.
create
If instead of saying no and putting up tremendous intent to that, she just screamed and threw her hands up in the air, there'd probably been a collision. It was that no made a difference. There was a strong intent. Otherwise, there's no particular intent to change anything.
And I happened to look in the side mirror, or I wouldn't have even noticed that happened. I wouldn't have seen it go through and I would have thought it went behind.
Now, sometimes it's
You would
not
have
just,
changed your own perception of it.
you're not the only player in the game though. It's not just your intent. Remember, there's a larger consciousness system. This larger consciousness system is not stupid. This larger consciousness system is it's an intelligent system. It's a self-changing system. It set all this up. So sometimes the larger consciousness system says it's going to be better for the overall entropy reduction that this lady doesn't have this wreck. It may not happen anyway. In other words, there's two players here. There's you, and well, there's everybody else. There's all the people, the sentient beings here. But besides that, the conscious system itself is a player, and it can modify things just because it thinks that the whole will do better that way. It's a schoolhouse.
But like Mark said with the camera, suppose I had been down the street just watching this event, what would have happened then?
If anybody was taking data, making a measurement,
Just
it
watching
would have just watching it, making a measurement, just watching it or filming it or whatever, Well, there is a little difference there. If you're just watching it, well, you're not all that credible either, right? It's just another person that says, you know, it says, wow, I saw this cars pass through each other, and everybody says, oh, he must be nuts, you know, he must have been drinking. So, see, that's not quite the same. Now, you have it on film, it's a little harder to deal with. Now, if you had it on film, and, you know, maybe they would say, well, you doctored that film wasn't true. You see what I mean? There's all levels here. What you have to get to is that in the end, you don't violate. There's no violation of those two things. The history's not inconsistent. The rule set hasn't been shown or demonstrated to have been violated. So it depends. It depends. If you're a real, you know, credible guy and you take films and, you know, you do all this and you have a reputation for being straight and honest, then that would have weighed a whole lot more than if, let's say, you'd been drinking a whole lot and you were out there with your camera, then it wouldn't have counted for much. So it's not a cut and dry kind of thing.
So if consciousness is fundamental, what created it? Where did it come from?
Okay,
What's
then,
its genesis?
okay, and that's a good question, because you also, that's the same, it comes to a similar question as what's outside of the consciousness system.
Right,
You
so
see,
keeping it within
right.
the consciousness realm.
What generated it? The best you can do is an argument that runs very similar to the argument we have with how did life start on this planet? Okay, when we come to those kind of arguments, what we say is, well, you know, we really don't know, because there's no, you know, the reporter wasn't there. So we make this guess. We say, well, there happened to be just a couple of organic molecules, and they just happened to, you know, came together and they formed some amino acids, and those amino acids, you know, took on these characteristics, and pretty soon the whole, which was a lower entropy configuration, because now it was more complex, you know, it found that it had certain abilities to survive and procreate better, because, you know, and we can build that up. Well, we don't really know. We're just making it up, right? It's just a guess. We can do the same thing with consciousness. We can say consciousness started with just some potential energy, some potential that was self-aware, just enough to differentiate between this state and that state. That's all. That's all it could do. Just so now we're just making this up. We don't really know where that came from, because we're not outside to be able to tell that. We're inside the system, and so it's waving the hands in the air. You don't know. And you said, well, if it could differentiate state A from state B, well, that's a 1 and a 0, isn't it? And if it could do that, it could differentiate A from B, from A from B, from A, from A from A, from B, from B, from B, and pretty soon you have patterns. Now you're doing it 1s and 0s. So it started and evolved. So you have to start with this assumption. I have two assumptions in the model. The whole model is based on just two assumptions. One of those assumptions is just that consciousness is. And it started as a monolithic potential energy that was aware of itself having at least two states.
So
That's it.
it was
And then it
energy
learned
before it was energy.
and
You said there's
and
no
where that
such
energy
thing.
came from, whatever, no idea. No way of knowing, you see. So that's the mystical assumption.
But since
Okay, then-
Doesn't make
there's
sense.
no record of that, so nobody
Right.
took the data. Furthermore, all the short-lived stars, they're all eating up a planet that's swallowed by that star. Any information, you know, buildings, the information's all wiped out. Then consciousness, it seems like consciousness would come together all of the possible ways that you could end up with a consciousness, because nobody's going back there and reading that, right? So all the possibilities are coexisting.
Okay.
And all of the ones that lead to this result would have happened.
But you're starting with a consciousness before consciousness. When you got to the point where the choice, you know, you create the reality with the choice, right, from the possibilities. That's how this virtual reality works. This virtual reality, as a part of consciousness, has that as its rule set. That's our rule set, how it works here. That doesn't necessarily mean that consciousness itself is the same as our virtual reality. It's created our virtual reality. It's the superset.